That CNBC TV 18 broke several months ago, and this is a continuation of the bitter boardroom battle. The founders at Infosys continue to be at loggerheads with the board, and this time the flashpoint is the salary hike given to the Chief Operating Officer Pravin Rao. Now, the board took up the proposal to hike Pravin Rao's salary by 35% over the weekend. The hike will take his overall compensation to over 12 crore rupees per annum. 24% of the promoters voted in favor of the move. Not just that, 33% of retail shareholders oppose the pay hike. Now, this is the highest opposition to any Infosys board proposal. However, the resolution was passed as 75% of institutional investors who own almost 60% stake in the company supported the pay hike. Now, speaking on the reasons for opposing the move, the company's founder, N.R. Narayanamurthy, said, and I quote, "This abstention has nothing to do with Pravin. I have lots of affection for him. I believe in striving towards reducing differences in compensation and equity in a corporation," end of quote. He went on to pose a question, and I quote again, "With what conscience can a decent person like Pravin, a man schooled in Infosys values for over 30 years, tell his juniors that they should work hard and make sacrifices to reduce cost and protect margin," end of quote. Now, Infosys has responded. In a statement issued a short while ago, the company has said that the CEO's compensation aligns the company's interests of the leadership with the interests of shareholders. It adds that the board undertook a survey of best practices and benchmark leadership compensation practices. Meanwhile, sources have indicated to CNBC TV 18 that the board will now seek feedback from institutional shareholders on the role of promoters and seek clarity on whether they should have a special say or special rights. Remember, Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas was appointed by the Infosys board to draw up a framework for governance, and my understanding is that this process of reaching out to stakeholders, largely institutional shareholders of Infosys, that exercise will start in about a week or so. The stock was under pressure today, but this was pretty much in line with other IT companies, and that is, of course, on account of the strengthening rupee. Joining us to take this conversation forward, Ganesh Natarajan, chairman of 5F World, as well as the former Vice President of NASSCOM. Also with us, Suhas Tuljapurgar, Managing Partner at Legacies, and Amit Tandon of IIAS. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Amit, let me start by asking you, this goes back to the larger issue, and that is the issue that is now going to be looked upon or looked into by Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, which is, do the promoters, the founders in this case of Infosys, people like N.R. Narayanamurthy, Nandan Nilekani, Krish Gopalakrishnan, etc., have a special say or special rights in the manner in which the company is governed and the manner in which the company is run? So the compensation being paid to Pravin Rao is just a small subset of this larger issue which the company needs to address.
Hi, good evening. You're absolutely right when you talk about the fact that what is the role of the promoters, and it's kind of interesting. At the end of the day, some of these decisions are taken by the board. They've kind of referred it to the shareholders, and the shareholders have agreed to the compensation which is being paid. But having said so, I guess at one level you just are, as said, the shareholders and the media and public at large is not able to remove Narayanamurthy from the scene, because he is, after all, a very iconic figure and is a founder of the company. So his shadow still looms large over the company. If you actually step back a little bit and look at what happens in some of the other companies, even after all these years, after Walt Disney died, if there is any issue in Walt Disney, the actually media comes and speaks to his grand nephew to see what he has to say. The same is the case with Hewlett Packard, and this is what we're seeing here. Let me just very quickly add, it's actually, I think the challenges the company is facing at this moment are much more external, and therefore by constantly focusing on internal structures, salary structures, we're kind of drawing attention to what the major issues are at this moment. But
let me just take this conversation forward with Suhas. And Suhas, while again, as I pointed out, this issue of compensation is really a symptom of a larger problem that Infosys and the Infosys board in particular is staring. But the point is that when we saw the last round of the war of words that had broken out between the founders and the Infosys board had said very categorically that they would put in place a compensation policy so that all decisions regarding compensation were dealt with transparently, and they were above board, and there would be no question of discretion, etc., which was the charge that came about with the former CFO's compensation and severance package. Now, should the board, given the past history, and this is recent past history, not have waited to put the compensation policy in place before going forward with this hike?
Shirin, you're absolutely right. I think there was a standstill. If you remember, virtually there was a standstill from February till now, and suddenly I think this issue about compensation to Mr. Pravin Rao broke out. You see, one of the primary reasons why we are seeing these issues appears to be lack of communication and understanding that yes, promoters and promoter group need slightly different attention than that of the shareholders, and there doesn't seem to be communication. I think initially there was a problem with respect to information asymmetry and information not reaching out the promoters as much and relevant as possible. But I think it's very unfortunate that I think promoters are talking to the management through probably press statements, and that the board and the management is talking to the promoters through lawyers. I think it's a very sad situation on the corporate governance. But the brighter side of it, and I think world over we have experienced this about the management group's compensation and the CEO and CFO and COO's compensation, that the shareholders have a say and that the promoters have a say in terms of what is fair and reasonable. And I think from that perspective, what's happening at Infosys is probably, on the corporate governance, paradigm, India is probably moving towards a maturity level.
Well, you could say that this is a vote for shareholder democracy. But Ganesh Natarajan also joins us. Ganesh, how would you read this? And the point that Suhas is making, it seems like there has been no bridge that has been built over the last few months since we saw that last battle of words between the founders as well as the board of Infosys. It seems like the communication breakdown continues, and effort has not been made to try and allay the concerns and apprehensions that the promoters and founders have.
Shirin, my point, I think we should look at this issue from three dimensions. The first is the whole issue of compensation. And I think the point that was made that ultimately management compensation or key leadership compensation must be tied up to the interests of the shareholders is extremely important. And from the best of my knowledge, from whatever I've read, Pravin Rao's compensation is very clearly back-ended towards performance. It's actually based on variabilization, etc., which is just fine. I don't know the exact numbers. That's one. The second is, and I think somebody rightly mentioned on this program, that the real issues of the industry are far away from internal politics. It's all about, the impact of automation, protectionism, digital transformation. So I think that's what the company has to focus on. I personally feel, and I said this in your earlier program as well, that this is, there are two extraordinary gentlemen who are exemplars of this country, Mr. Seshai and Mr. Narayan Murthy. I think they just need to sit together and say, look, how do we have a way forward that is above board, that is, everybody is involved. And I think these discussions on corporate governance will then go away, but it's just a question of communication that needs to happen. So I think the real issue is that, and not whether it is something very drastic or something fundamentally wrong with compensation.
Amit Tandon, let me go back to you now, because as I pointed out, my understanding is that this process of external consultation, and largely it's going to be consultation with institutional investors to seek feedback on what they believe the role of the promoters ought to be. Should they have a special say? Should they not have a special say? Should they get special rights? Should they have access to information that other minority shareholders don't have access to? These are going to be questions I understand that the external consultation will look at, as Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas is given the duty of drawing up this new corporate governance framework. What is it that you expect from this, and what are the questions that you would like to raise as part of this?
The most fundamental question is that, look, should the team of Mr. Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nilekani, and the others still be a part of the promoter group. I believe sometime back there was a proposal that they kind of declassify themselves and no longer call themselves promoters, but at that stage the company in its wisdom felt that, look, having some degree of continuity really makes sense. But you've got continuity, but at a shareholder level, but not at the board level. If you need continuity, you need institutional memory, you need institutional history, what's behind the decision, that needs to happen at the board level. You can't say there are people who've kind of been there, done it, and now sitting outside who are going to be contributing. So I think a more fundamental question is that, look, has Infosys now crossed the bridge and is no longer it's a professionally managed company and no longer has a set of promoters? Once you're clear that it no longer has a set of promoters, a lot of the issues which are being raised now will drop off, and maybe they get substituted by another set of issues. But some of what we are debating and discussing now will no longer be relevant.
Okay. Suhas Tuljapurgar, there have been people who have called for a reconstitution of the board of Infosys, given the fact that there clearly seems to be this trust deficit. And again, my understanding is that even within the board, there are two points of view. One view, and some board members do believe that, people like Mr. Murthy have a special relationship with the company. I mean, this is a company that they built, nurtured for over 30 years, and hence they must have special privileges and special rights. And there's another point of view which says that they no longer have anything to do with operationally running the company, and hence they shouldn't enjoy special rights and privileges. So what do you believe will be the way forward? Do you believe that the reconstitution of the board is perhaps the best way out of this?
See, Shireen, I have a slightly different take on this, because you see, when we talk about corporate governance and these kind of issues, and I completely agree with Ganesh that we need to actually focus on the core issues. If you were to look at that, then we need what is popularly known as common sense approach to the corporate governance, which is like simply saying that, yes, promoters have, and in this case, probably Mr. Narayan Murthy and all of the promoters of Infosys were at one point in time professionals working for the company. They were professionals in a sense. Therefore, it needs a special attention and relationship, but that should come through a common sense approach to the corporate governance. I think what is the need of the hour today, at least in India, is to understand that the corporate governance does not necessarily mean what is there under the Companies Act or under the laws, but a common sense approach to the corporate governance. And I think there is a dire need today. Whenever we talk about these boardroom battles, and I think we've experienced two of them, we are on the verge of experiencing a third one. So actually, a common sense approach in the Indian context to the corporate governance issues is, I think, very much required at this stage, which will sort out these issues. Because a promoter, if you were to look at promoters in Infosys and giving them kind of special treatment or having special consultative rights, advisory rights, is going to be in the interest of the company. In some other cases, it may not be in the interest of the day-to-day management, and where management needs to be empowered. So by and large, I think this approach needs to be changed. The outlook to the corporate governance needs to be different.
A very quick question to Amit Tandon. Amit, just taking the point that Shireen made forward, promoters have 12.75% stake. There have been ex-Infosians that have been asking for a reconstitution of the board. If that were to be taken up further, hypothetical situation now, yes, but if it were to be taken up, I'm trying to understand the process. How would it work?
Look, it would, as in any case, that the shareholders would propose a name which would then be approved. The board would consider it, and ideally with its recommendations, forward it to the shareholders to vote upon. Now, the question to ask is that, look, will the original set of promoters, will 12% be able to have a seat on the board after this, if it comes up to vote, or will not be? And that is something where there will be some investors who will be hard-nosed and others who will be a little bit sentimental and say that, look, one or two of them, since they've started the company, they need to come back on the board at this stage. So it's very difficult to call, but I guess it's shareholder democracy, which will shareholders who will decide whether they want them back on the board at this stage or not.
Ganesh Natarajan, the final word to you, the way forward.
And the way forward, I think, is what Suhas already mentioned. Management need to be empowered. I mean, I've had the privilege of running 2 publicly limited companies, Aptech and then Zensar, for 25 years. And the success we enjoyed was purely because we had a very supportive board-managed company, but the management was given a free hand to take decisions. What is required in Infosys, I think, is for the shareholder or the board issues to be resolved very, very quickly. And I think they should just sit down and resolve it, so that you can leave people like Vishal and Praveen and all outstanding professionals the task of rebuilding this company in a very tough business environment. That's what I would recommend.
All right, Ganesh Natarajan, Suhas and Amit Tandon, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18 with your take on the big story.